The other thing was that the college has primacy in the planning process. Not district telling the colleges, but really it should come from the colleges, and then these committees should facilitate what the college has planned to do or hope to do in the future through our educational master plan, our facilities plan, and our technology plan. It had to be transparent, which is a word we use a lot here at College of Alameda. It needs to be transparent so anyone looking at it would say, oh yeah, I can see how this works, and it makes sense, it's logical. And then the other one was that the Planning and Budget Committee, and when I talk about the structures, I'll talk a little bit more about that, would make recommendations to the Chancellor. And because it is a shared governance committee, then the Chancellor would then work with the constituency groups. And then if that recommendation was approved, or if it wasn't approved, there would be some dialogue so that we would then be able to take that information back to the campuses. So when you see the pathways, you'll see that they have double arrows, meaning that communication is both ways, both across as well as up and down. So it's a clear path for recommendations and decision making. And we also, even though it's not up here, is that we wanted to make sure that people wouldn't bypass the system, as sometimes it is known to happen where people, for whatever reason, try to bypass the normal procedures and go either directly to the board or go directly to the chancellor or go directly to the president. Now that is not going to stop. However, there are at least going to be some formal processes in place so people know what the proper processes should be. And then there would be decisions, and then there would be minutes sent out so people wouldn't say, how did we make that decision? I never heard that. Who was the one that made that? So that was the other basic purpose of it. Okay, next slide, Carrie. Oh, I'm sorry. You're ahead of me, she's fast. The purpose was, as we all say, was to promote student success. If we have clear processes and decision-making chains of command, as they call them in the military, then hopefully some of those ideas that we have that will promote student success will be vetted and will be heard. We have create a structured advisory process so that the stakeholders in the process feel that their words or their recommendations are being heard, and that it doesn't just happen here and then it reaches some glass ceiling and doesn't go any further. So we wanted to stop those bottlenecks, so to speak, where sometimes decisions aren't made because they never get further than someone's desk. To serve as official and the standard processes for recommendations. There is always going to be informal processes. There will always be individuals or groups that will go and make appointments to talk to the chancellor of the board or whoever. But this would be our formal process that we could say as an institution and as a district, this is what the process is. And then we would kind of self-observe, correct, and hopefully hold people to those standards. And then the other one is it would be a process for us to resolve issues. There is always going to be something, whatever it is. Say College of Alameda says we should have a brand new building. I've heard that before. We need a new building. We don't have a building like Laney or like Merritt or like BCC. We don't have an auditorium. We don't have a performing stage. How does that get vetted? How does it get decided whether to go forward or not? It starts here, but we really haven't had a formal process for that. Okay? So we said that this would be 1-year test, that we would try it out for a year. During that year, we would make recommendations, we would make changes, we would see if it worked or not, and then we would go back and revisit this, and we would modify it if it was necessary. The modification would come through those processes that we were going to put in place. Okay. Some of the terms, I know we tend to use these terms and throw them out like everybody knows what they mean, SIMC, DWIMC, SPPAC. So just as we go through this, the planning and budget integration model, or a lot of times you'll see it as the PBI, I'm a dyslexic. Our planning and budget committee, The other name that we decided to call that was, in our own little group, was the Tough Decision-Making Committee, because that is the committee that would ultimately, if there is disagreement on how to go forward, they would be making those tough decisions and those tough recommendations to the Chancellor, the SMT, and also to the board. And then the district subject matter committees. Those are the committees that we'll be talking about in terms of the technology committee, the education committee, and the facilities committee. And then our shared agreement. This one is kind of key. When all committee members provide some level of support for a recommendation. Doesn't mean that we all agree with it. It means that we can live with it. We may not all support it 100%, but it's something that we can live with. So it has that degree of support from all members of the committee. And that is what we strive for, is that shared agreement. The annual budget and calendar integration planning and budget cycle. This was developed by the budget committee, Tom Smith as the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, chairs that committee. And these are just some of the major deadline dates. And again, they're in your binder or in your handout. And we've been talking about this for a while. College of Alameda had its own process. We kind of started ours about, I think we've gone through 2 cycles of it now. And now we have to get on board with what the district cycle is. And the reason we have to have a district cycle is so that decisions on budget are done in a uniform way and isn't first come, first serve. And that we tie that not only to the budget, but also tie it to our integrated planning, our unit plans, our program reviews, so that there is a system-wide way of making decisions and everybody knows what the deadlines are as we move forward. Okay, this is the flow, the responsibilities, and also the composition. If we start at the top, you see it's the Board of Trustees. Then we have the Chancellor, the SMT, and that's the senior management team. And the senior management team is comprised of the 4 presidents, the vice chancellors, the vice chancellor of, I want to say plant facilities. It's Sadiq Akaro, Dr. Akaro. That's just an old term I grew up with, so I always say that. But building and facility services, I think, is the correct title. Also, our CFO is part of that, and also our Vice Chancellor of Ed Services, Dr. Wise Allen, and Tom Smith is the other person. So they make up that senior management team with the presidents, and then they bring in other individuals as necessary. Then we have the District Planning and Budget Committee, or Budget Council. This is that tough decision committee that I was talking about. And I'll also go over the composition, because that was one of the points that we didn't always agree upon, is who should be on that committee to make up that. And then we felt that the technology committee, we have a distance ed committee that just met. I just came from that meeting, and we've weighed in on what we think should be the composition of the technology committee. We have a district distance ed committee. We used to have a very active administrative technology committee that hasn't been active in a while. And so we felt that we should compose those together and call it just one committee. And then those different facets of that would be the subcommittees. We have what we call right now the DWMC, the District-Wide Educational Master Planning Committee, but really we want to call it just the Education Committee. So DWMC would morph into this Education Committee, because remember, education and educational planning should drive everything else, which is why it's in the middle. And then the other one is the Facilities Committee. And what was decided on the composition, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead, is that each of the presidents would be on one of these committees, and then the vice chancellors would also be on the various committees. And if you look at the very bottom, which is really how it should start, each of the colleges would have their own committees.